happens at end of life, and how do we have more meaningful connections with patients with dementia who maybe are having difficulty understanding verbally, maybe they're having difficulty communicating verbally, or just nonverbal altogether. So do you want to click next slide? So when we teach dementia to family caregivers, when we are talking to them about how to connect, we really talk about dementia in the terms of 3 stages. So some of you will probably know the medical 7 stages of dementia. When we're working with family members, when we're working with volunteers, we really try to stick to these 3 stages just to make it a little bit more easy to understand. Also, family members, if you all have experience with that, you know that we can get very hung up in what stage someone is in, whether it's stage 1, stage 4. Often they will say, I think my mom's in stage 4, and then they'll tomorrow they seem more like they're maybe in stage 3 and back to that early stage. So we really, when we work with family members, try to talk about those 3 stages. So we're really going to focus today on middle stage and late stage. So that middle stage is where people are just starting to have some difficulty, maybe verbalizing, having difficulty understanding. And then that late stage is where you all as hospice volunteers probably find it most difficult to connect with someone with dementia. Okay, next slide, please. So let's talk just briefly about the symptoms in the middle or moderate stage of dementia. This is where we really start to see all of those sort of stereotypical symptoms of dementia start to occur. So the wandering, short-term memory loss, but there also may be some long-term memory loss that's starting to take place, increased difficulty with tasks, and this is going to be key for you all, increased language difficulty. So difficulty finding words, maybe a lot of repetition of words, inventing new words. We often call that word salad, where the things that they're talking about it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to us. They often sound like gibberish words to us. If you're working with someone in the middle stage, really pay attention to some of those gibberish words. We're going to talk a little bit about validation later in the presentation, because some of those words can still hold meaning and be meaningful to the person with dementia, even though for us, they may not sound like something that's making sense. Oftentimes we can mimic those words or the sound of those words in the later stages and really give the person a sense of connecting, because we are validating where they are in their verbal abilities. And they often lose train of thought. They may speak less often. This is where they are often unable to recognize family and friends. So we will also see this obviously, of course, continue into that late stage of dementia too. But just because they don't recognize friends and family, just because they may not recognize your exact presence there as a volunteer, as someone who's connecting with them in the end, doesn't mean that they don't know you're there, doesn't mean that they can't still have some meaningful connections with friends and family. They may have increased behavioral issues. So this is where we start to see wandering, maybe some agitation, different things starting to happen that may not be very desirable for the family members. So, when we're talking about palliative care, this is also often where we're starting to look at palliative care, because the person is not able to connect in the same way. They're starting to move into that late stage. So as volunteers, we can also often help family members find easier ways to connect in these stages as well. Things like validation, things like therapeutic fibbing. This is also where people in the middle stages may start to experience some visual or auditory hallucinations. So they're really starting to exist in a world that is of their own perception. And that's a really important point to remember as we move forward. The person with dementia, their world is starting to shift from ours. And probably a lot of you have had this training where you have learned some communication techniques, where you start to realize that what people with dementia are experiencing it's not exactly the same thing that the rest of us are experiencing. So, they may think that they live in a different time period, often because that short-term memory is not as intact. They will start to think that they're in different stages of life. So, someone who's 80 may start to think that they're 20 or 30. So as we're starting to connect in that late stage, we want to really remember that short-term memory is compromised, but those things that are happening in their long-term memory, while they may not remember all the details of things that are happening in their long-term memory, we can also connect with them based on where we think they are in their perceived world. Okay, so symptoms in the late stage. So this is where you will often probably come in as hospice volunteers, as hospice workers. You're starting to see these symptoms in the late stage. So they're requiring 24-hour care and assistance. They're really having difficulty holding a conversation. The slide says unaware of what is happening around them. That comes out of a textbook where it says unaware of what is happening around them. I believe that they are still aware of what is happening around them. They just may not understand everything that is happening around them. So they can sense that there's presence in the room. They know that there are people there. They can still enjoy these moments of joy, but it's just they may not understand everything that is happening around them. They become unable to recognize self or family. We talked about that, not being able to recognize family more in the moderate stage. And what often happens in the late stage, starts to happen in that moderate stage, is they don't really recognize themselves either. So, this is where we often, we may bring a mirror in to show grandma how beautiful she looks in the mirror. But if I think I'm 20 years old and someone holds a mirror up and I see an 80-year-old woman in front of me, I don't know who that person is. So sometimes when we want to help somebody recognize themselves, it's intuitive to us to show them a picture of themselves, to show them themselves in the mirror, but it can be disturbing for someone in the late stage because they're not sure who they are. And so, we want to still connect with them, but maybe showing them pictures and things like that is not always the best way to do that. They often become unable to walk or smile or talk. They may groan, grunt, scream. They sleep a lot of the time. This late stages where they often become bedbound, require turning. They can sometimes become unable to swallow. They'll experience weight loss, total loss of bowel and bladder control. They may start to experience seizures, and they just have sort of this steady decline in body function until death. So what I really wanted to point out with this slide is if you look at this slide, I'm talking about all of the things that the person loses. Look at that slide. This is all things that are just really unpleasant things that are happening to the person with dementia. And so it's very easy as family members, it's very easy as healthcare workers, as volunteers, to start to focus on here are all the things that this person can't do anymore. They're not able to connect with me in a very meaningful way because they have lost the ability to do so many of these things. And that is not true. They can still connect in a very meaningful way in the late stage. Throughout dementia, one of the things that we really focus on when we're working with family members, when we're working with healthcare professionals, is creating those moments of joy, creating pleasurable moments. People with dementia can't remember what happened last week. In this late stage, they may not remember what happened 2 or 3 minutes ago. They certainly can't understand and know how to plan for the future. So what they have is this moment. And even though they may not remember this 3 moments from now, what they have is this moment. And so we really want to spend time figuring out how do we connect with this person where death is imminent, but they still have family members around. They're still here with us. They're experiencing all of these losses. And it seems so much, and I say this in quotes, it seems very much like they're a shell of a person. So I think part of connecting with someone in that late stage is changing our mindset as well. Changing our mindset to understand that we want to continue to create these moments of joy for them. And we can do that, but it may not be these huge moments of joy that we often think about when we talk about pleasurable moments, moments of joy, connecting. It may not be something that takes a long time. It may not be this very big event that happens. It could just be something very, very small that helps us to connect with them and give them comfort. Some of the symptoms in the late stages as well, they may have some behavioral symptoms. They may become more agitated. So part of connecting with them is helping them to sort of calm some of those types of behaviors. Can we go to the next slide? So, common behaviors in late stage can also include verbal or physical aggression and agitation. And some of that is just because of perhaps pain they're in, not understanding or being able to sort of connect with the world around them. I'm sure it is very, very frustrating to not be able to verbalize your needs, your wants. And for many people with dementia, they just are they're nonverbal, or they have those word salad words that they're communicating, and they may know what they're trying to communicate to us even in this late stage. We just can't understand it. So they often have that physical aggression, verbal aggression, because they're frustrated with what they can't communicate to us. So part of connecting with them is not just to give them those pleasurable moments, but it's also to give them that peace and to help them sort of calm those things that are happening in this late stage, that they have a much more peaceful transition, much in those late stages. So now is where we're going to get into the nitty gritty about how we want to experience life through the senses. Right. So people in the late stage can still sense those things that are happening around them. They can still experience life through the senses. It just means we have to get creative in how we do that. We have to sort of rethink how we're going to connect with someone. So we're going to talk about touch, smell, sight, sound, taste, right? The five senses. And some of this probably seems a little bit like a no-brainer. Of course, this is what we're going to do. But when you are working with someone with dementia in that late stage, it can often be really intimidating when you're not quite sure how to connect with them, or if they are actually connecting with you. Now, the hard part is knowing you may be doing everything right. The hard part is really getting that communication and feedback back from them. Are they benefiting from this? Is this something that they're enjoying? Is this something that is making a difference to them? So we'll talk a little bit about how to sort of read that body language as well, because it does, look a little bit different sometimes. So we will talk about these. Talk in the person's first language, if possible, is something very important to remember. I had a lady in our adult day center, and she was nearing the end of that sort of middle stage, and her first language was German. And I had taken German in high school. Not always a very useful language. It was the only foreign language available in our high school, so that's the one I took. And she would, and I did not speak German well at all, but I knew a few words. And her entire face would just light up when I would say words to her in German, even if I couldn't put a full sentence together, which I couldn't usually put a full sentence together. Just being able to say a few words to her really helped with her connection. She was really not engaging with anyone else because she really no longer understood English. German was her first language. That was what she was speaking. Her own kids didn't really speak German. So if we could say just a few things in her first language, it made her whole face light up. You could see the joy that she had just hearing something that was familiar to her, hearing something from her childhood. And then, of course, the religious and spiritual considerations that are important to them as well. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about touch. So people with dementia, in those late stages, this is often the first way that we connect with them is through touch. And probably one of the most important ways that we connect with them is through touch. But also keep in mind that not everyone likes to be touched, and people with dementia, they can experience pain a little differently. They can experience touch a little bit differently. So it may be painful for them at times if we're if we're rubbing a little bit too hard, and maybe even holding hands with them can be uncomfortable. So if they start to wince or pull back, then touch may not be the right way to connect with them in this moment, but it may be something that we want to go back and try later. We just need to be mindful of how we do that. So sometimes something as simple as holding hands can be really comforting for someone with dementia. And again, remember, I said this doesn't have to be some big over event that we're doing. When we talk about connection, we often think we really want to be seeing this expression on their face. We really want to be getting something back from them, some feedback. It can be something very, very simple for someone with dementia. So just holding hands can be a really important way to connect with someone with dementia. And sometimes just sitting in silence can be perfectly okay holding their hand. Because too much stimulation for someone with dementia can be difficult for them to manage. So sometimes just being silent is the easiest way to connect with them. It allows them to be where they are in their world, but it also helps them feel like there is somebody right here with me who can connect with me. And this person is holding my hand. It must be someone familiar. It must be someone who cares about me. And that's really all that they need to have that connection. Gentle massage, and that can be as simple as just gently rubbing their hands, rubbing their arms, using lotion to do that so you keep their skin hydrated. Just remember, that gentle massage so that we're not causing them to misperceive that as something else or misperceive that pain, but just having a really gentle massage. Brushing or stroking hair can be really comforting for someone with dementia. And again, I want to caution that for some people that can be difficult for them to tolerate as well. One of my favorite residents in the nursing home who had dementia had a very, very, she had a very difficult late stage. She was sort of the epitome of what we were talking about later. She would often groan and yell and scream, and she would kick and hit and become very unsettled in her bed and just be thrashing around. And the scream that she had was just almost unbearable for us to listen to because it just seemed so anguished. And um, the staff would often call me and say, "We don't know what else to do with her. Can you please come help?" One of the things that worked really, really well for her was just so I didn't ever start out brushing her hair because I think sometimes the brush was a little bit too much for her, but I would just start playing with her hair. She had very beautiful long hair. And I would just start slowly playing with her hair and then stroke her hair, and then eventually start brushing her hair. And she would calm down almost immediately. And I could sit there for 30 minutes to an hour just playing with her hair, and it would keep her really, really calm for that long of a period of time. And she would often, her screaming would stop. She would start to hum a little bit. It wasn't like a sing-songy humming like you would think of with a song, but just sort of this real gentle and I could tell she was very content doing that. It calmed her down. So while she didn't have any kind of verbal telling me, "Thank you for doing this," or "This really feels nice," I could tell by the way she had calmed down. I was getting that feedback from her that it was helping her to connect with me. And I would just continue to do that um, either until she fell asleep or until I felt like she had calmed down a lot. So I think the stroking of her hair was very comforting to her, but probably it also triggered some childhood memories of her mom. She had several sisters. They all had beautiful long hair as children. She had talked, so I knew her from early stage all the way through late stage. She would talk in her earlier stages about how her sisters would braid each other's hair and brush each other's hair, how her mom would brush their hair. So while it was probably comforting, it probably also triggered some really pleasant childhood memories for her. And so that was a great way to just connect and help her feel calm as well. And then while I was stroking her hair, I would often hum to her or sing to her and tell her some just very soft stories as well. Hugs can be a very important way to connect with someone in that late stage of dementia. We talked a little bit about gentle touch. The fidget blankets or the pets and stuffed animals. Can you go to the next slide? If you all have not heard of fidget blankets, these are a couple that we have here at the Schmeating Center. So they are for people in sort of the moderate to late stages. So moderate stages, and I don't know how well you can see this. This is one that one of our staff actually made. So it has buttons. The fabrics are of different textures. It has those little stretchable, slinky things. I don't know what you call them. That are the expandable bands, some beads, some additional buttons, some of the threads on there you can pull up and move. There's a zipper on there. So in the moderate stage of dementia, you can connect with someone with dementia just using these and letting them do these activities. In the later stage, just placing that on someone with dementia and letting them feel those different textures can be really calming for them. Just letting them sort of play with the different buttons, feel the different textures, If you want to go to the next slide, I think this one was just made out of some fabric. This one was actually made on a towel. We've had this one forever and ever. It was actually made on just like a bath towel. And then I know it's hard to tell from the picture, but all of these fabrics are very, very different textures. Some of them are rough, some of them are really, really soft. And so just having them be able to sort of feel those different textures or rubbing those different textures on them can be a really important way to connect with them as well. Those textures can be very calming for them. Pets, stuffed animals can also be a way to sort of introduce that touch and that texture. Who doesn't, if you're a dog lover, who doesn't love the dog licking your hand? So people with dementia can still get pleasure from that as well, even in that late stage. Petting stuffed animals, they make some very realistic looking stuffed animals now, but even just having something, that you buy it at Walmart or Dollar Tree that's really, really soft and letting them hold that and just sort of stroke it also can be very calming, also can be very a great way to connect with them as well. If they're not able to move their own hand to stroke that stuffed animal or the fidget blanket, sort of helping them to move their hands so that they can stroke that as well. Baby dolls can be, I saw somebody type in the chat and they have a resident who loves baby dolls. Yeah, baby dolls can also be something very, very calming for someone in the late stage. And again, for many of them, they have regressed back to a time where they're younger. Maybe they're moms in the world that they have built from their own perception. And so having a doll to carry can be very calming as well. It gives them that sense of purpose, gives them something that they can connect with as well. Okay, next slide. Smell. So another way we can connect with them is through smell. So another one of those five senses. So things like scented lotions, candles, if you're going to be nearby so that you can blow the candle out when you leave. And especially candles that elicit some very pleasant childhood memories. So things like cookies, baking, cinnamon, apple pies, things that sort of elicit those very important childhood memories can often can often bring calm and connection as well. Essential oils, we actually have here a whole box of just different essential oils. We put them in just little vials and put them in a box so we can pull those out for things. We have cinnamon, we have peppermint, we have things that smell like Christmas trees, things that smell like cookies baking. And so just having those scents in the room, just holding them right up close to them so that they can smell those scents can also be a really important way to connect with someone with dementia. Household smells that elicit those pleasant memories. So anything that would elicit a childhood memory, but also just things like citrus that kind of gives you that burst of energy. Reading about what essential oils can do, introducing those in the room as well, and just letting them have that sense of connection with you can also be important. Okay, next slide. Sight. So for people in the late stage of dementia, it can be this one can be a little bit more difficult one, especially if they're often sleeping, if they're don't have their eyes open a lot. This one can be a little bit more difficult one, but if they are alert, things like bright colors or soothing colors. So on the fidget blanket, you notice the one had a lot of bright colors, and that's just sort of to elicit that connection through sight, looking at the bright colors. I don't know if anyone has ever heard of a schnoozling room. If anyone has one, I'm so jealous. I absolutely love those, but often you will see bright lights, sort of the LED lights that are shifting, going up and down, because those lights can have a really calming effect. It's called a schnoozling room. I think it's SNOEZLEN, and it's really just a room that is full of different sensory type things for people with dementia. I think they're very popular in Europe and other countries, but I've certainly read some articles about them. So they have a lot of things. They have all of the lights. They have things that have different textures on the walls. They have different smells, happening in the room. So all of those things that we're kind of talking about that bring that calming effect, they have whole rooms that are designed just to do that. They're the coolest thing if anybody ever wants to look one up. Um, Nature, so nature pictures, calm, soothing nature pictures. Bringing nature inside is kind of it. So this is an opposite. It's not something I have lifted on the slide, but opening the windows and bringing nature inside. Um, it is it is so important to have nature for all of us. It helps our brain, helps our mood. So being able to open windows and bring some nature inside, bring plants close by. I know we were sort of talking about, bringing flower boxes to the person with dementia. They may not be able to engage in that in the late stage, but just having plants and flowers and things that are really pretty to look at close by for them can also be a great way to connect with them. And then family pictures. And when I say family pictures, again, I'm talking about those pictures that are from their past. So if it was something that happened last year, they're probably not going to connect with that nearly like they're going to connect with something that maybe happened in their childhood. So pleasant childhood pictures of people that they loved. And I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to hold that just for a minute because I know some of you are probably thinking we're not remember all those people in those family pictures. So I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit more detail here in a few minutes about those family pictures as well. Okay, next slide. Sound. Okay, so now we're going to go back to storytelling with those family pictures. So just the sound of your voice can be very gentle and soothing. Again, people with dementia, it's really, really hard for them to filter out all of those things that are going on around them. So if things are too loud, if there's a TV going, if lots of people are talking, that's not going to be very comforting for them. And it's not going to help you connect with them because they're trying to filter out all of those other things that are happening. So just talking to them in a really smooth, gentle, soothing voice. Storytelling. So I mentioned looking through family pictures and bringing family pictures to the bedside, bringing family pictures where you're sitting with them and flipping through the family pictures. They may not engage always with you and looking at those pictures because they may not be exactly sure who they're looking at. However, if you can start telling them stories about those pictures, that's really, really important to them. So what I often hear from family members are, in that middle stage of dementia is I get so tired of hearing the same story over and over and over again. Mom has told me the same story about growing up on a farm over and over, and I just can't listen to it one more time. If you know the person in the middle stage, or if family members can tell you those stories, it's really important to listen to those stories in the middle stage so that you can retell them later in this late stage. If you can retell them their story, that can be a wonderful, wonderful way to reconnect or connect with someone with dementia. My grandmother had dementia. She passed away about a year ago in May. And we would pull out old pictures of things, even in the late stage when I would go visit her. I would often just sort of sit next to her on her bed and I would tell her stories about things that she used to do when I was a kid. One of my favorite stories to tell her, she lived out on a farm and my sister and I were visiting her one day and she had just had her roof redone. And so we were picking up shingles. We were probably 6 or 7. We were picking up shingles from the yard that the workers had left. And we were just, doing our thing, picking up those shingles. And the dog came up with a snake. Dog comes running up, has a snake in her mouth, dropped the snake right near my sister and I. My grandma, I had never seen anyone move so fast. She had a shovel and that snake's head off in a matter of seconds. She was protecting her grandkids. She was tough. I remember thinking how tough my grandma must be, and I was not going to mess with her anymore. And so I would tell her those types of stories and she would laugh and giggle. So I know she didn't always remember that those things had happened, but I would tell her those stories and she would laugh at them, or she would make sounds to indicate to me that she was getting something out of that story, that she was connecting with that story. So if you combine those family pictures with some storytelling, that can also be a really effective way to communicate and connect with someone who's nonverbal. They can't tell those stories back to you, but you can certainly tell those stories back to them. Calming sounds, and then music, music, music. Music is probably one of the most effective tools we have in the late stage of dementia. And I don't know, Emma, if you can play that YouTube video, if everyone can watch it. If there's a way to click with that. There may not be. So there may not be a way to do that. Well,
are you able to see it? I pulled it over to the screen. I might have to actually share the.
See where you pulled it over. That's okay. It's a little bit long. We'll just kind of, yeah, we'll just add the YouTube link in the chat.
Okay, all right.
So this is a story about, so the YouTube link is a video about Henry, and some of you maybe have seen it. It's showing Henry, who's probably more moderate stage than late, but certainly getting close to the late stage, and he's primarily nonverbal, and just what music will do, what music did for him. One of my favorite stories about someone in the late stages of dementia was when I worked at the adult day center. I had a gentleman who had young onset dementia. So he was only in his 50s when he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And he was, by the time I knew him, he was pretty much nonverbal. He walked very much hunched over. He couldn't even straighten himself. He had high agitation. He would follow me around all day long. If I was not in my office, he would pound on my door and start yelling, just really uncomfortable in where he was in the world. And so I had left my office to go to a meeting, and one of the staff came to get me out of the meeting, and she said, "You have to come down here and see this right away." So I walked in, and because he was so much younger than everyone else, a lot of times the music that we played was more geared towards people in their 80s and 90s. But just for some reason that day, the activity director had put Hank Williams Jr. On for music. And when I walked down there, this gentleman looked at me and said, "There you are." And remember, he was pretty much nonverbal. So he looked at me and said, "There you are, come dance with me." He was standing upright. He was dancing. He had all of the ladies up dancing with him. He was laughing. And I said, "Hank Williams?" And he said, yes, this is my music." And he spoke in complete sentences to me. That music just clicked with him. So we called his wife right away, and his daughters. He still had daughters living at home. And they came to get him. As soon as they walked in the room, he said, "There's my wife. There are my daughters." And it just really connected with him, that music. And they were able to have pretty much a full evening. She said that effect lasted throughout most of the evening. By about 7 or 8 o'clock, he was back to really being nonverbal and bent over again. But they had gotten some really fantastic moments with him throughout that evening. We never had that same impact again. We tried it several more times with him. He would perk up when we would play music that was interesting to him. We never quite saw that same effect, but it was amazing what music could do. And so, of course, the thing to remember is it has to be music that's meaningful to them. So if it's something, it's something that you like to listen to, but maybe you're, the person that you're working with had never listened to country music, and you're trying to play country music, that's not going to work for them. But playing old hymns that may have been important to them, or big band music that they had listened to, jazz, whatever was important to them, can have a really, really powerful impact on them. Also, if you use music, we can often get other things done by using music. So if you use music and you need them to do a task, sometimes playing that music can make those tasks easier for them to accomplish, or easier for you to accomplish those tasks as well. So music is a really, really powerful way to connect. Okay, next slide. taste. So again, this one can sometimes be a little bit difficult. And often when we think about taste, we think about eating food, but just putting something on the tip of someone's tongue can be really, really important too, or it can be really effective too. So taking, a squirt of orange and putting it on their tongue, um, maybe a little bit of peppermint and putting it on their tongue. So again, something that was pleasurable to them in their past, something that might elicit memories from childhood. A little piece of chocolate on their tongue. If they're having difficulty swallowing and they're not taking in food, just having those things on the tip of their tongue can help them taste it and can also be an important way to connect with them. And accompany that with smells, because we all know smells and taste go hand in hand. So if you have something something that tastes good that you can also accompany with a smell. So use your essential oils that have the citrus flavor, put a little bit of orange on the tip of their tongue, and that can also be a really powerful way to connect. Okay, next slide. And then finally, putting it all together. So if you can put all of those things together, you're going to have the most impactful way of connecting. So for example, open the blinds while holding their hands, but also playing their favorite song, maybe placing chocolate on the tip of their tongue, burning a candle that smells like cookies baking. So all of those things taken together can create a really pleasurable moment for someone in that late stage of dementia and create a really important way to connect with them as well.